Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. It's the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. You know, I was working on my transcript for Jonathan Neville and Jim Lucas. They've got a book on the seer stone versus the Urim and Thummim as far as translation of the Book of Mormon, and I accidentally cut out 20 minutes of our conversation. So we're going to talk about David Whitmer and why they think he's not a reliable witness. So you won't want to miss this extra conversation. Check it out. Did you finish what you wanted to say about David Whitmer?
No, we got to finish David Whitmer.
A little bit.
So anyway, tangents are all about, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
David Whitmer, I'll make it quick. So he's in Fayette, where 78% of the Book of Mormon is translated, but he's not a translator. He's not a scribe. He's never a scribe. He never really says explicitly that he was present for the translation. He, except for maybe this one time when Joseph did, he describes like everybody was there. There's this one account where he says, "Oh, everybody was there. All of my family. Some Smiths came over, and a bunch of other people
Was there for the translation?
sitting
for
around
the
table, yeah.
demonstration of the stone in the hat, using the stone in the hat." So he describes this
So
one
is this
event.
like a magic show? What is this?
It's Joseph trying to satisfy people's curiosity by kind of giving them, using his seer stone and the hat to try to give them an idea of how the translation is working.
I mean, it feels like a woman with her crystal ball. I can see the future. I mean, is that what he's doing, basically?
Well, that's if you follow the seer stone in the hat account, that's what the whole thing was. And we're saying, no, that's not what the whole thing was.
Oh.
It was Joseph saying, I mean, there's an account of a cousin of the Whitmers was working working at the Whitmer home as a kind of, housemaid or whatever. And she was like, "What's going on upstairs? What are these two guys doing up there? This is really weird. They come down and they're all glowy and spiritual and stuff, and something strange is going on up here. I'm quitting and going home, and I'm going to tell everybody this is the cousins, the Whitmer cousins, have gone crazy, unless I told what's going on. So that kind of thing, which Zena's Gurley uses this great expression, awful curiosity. And there's probably a lot of other people really kind of, what's going on? How's this work? So Joseph did this demonstration. He pulled out his peep stone, which his seer stone, which he carried around with him all the time. I call it his pet rock. He really liked it. It's a beautiful stone. If it's the one in the church has in its archives.
The white one or the brown one?
Yeah.
The brown
Both?
one.
Well, it mainly people are talking about the striped one, the brown and white striped one.
Which Jerry says came from Wyoming or somewhere.
Right. Jerry Grover.
Jerry Grover
says that kind of a stone is it was in the gut of a dinosaur, and that's why it's so smooth, and is because it was dinosaurs, they're like birds, they have these stones in their guts to help them digest, and then when they died it fell out and so forth. So he says that kind of a stone would be especially rare in eastern Pennsylvania.
New York.
Or New York. So it would, when Willard Chase found it, you can understand that I've never seen a rock like this before. I mean, you must know rock hounds, people who, like to collect rocks. So this was a really special, neat looking rock. And that's what Joseph got and he carried around with him until he gave it to Oliver Cowdery. So it was like I said, I call it his pet rock. He really loved it. It was a really fun rock. And, we'll get into the Martin Harris angle of that.
When was this demonstration, approximately what year?
This would have been during that translation process, 1829,
Yeah.
Okay.
when they're after they've gotten to the Whitmer home. So this is when they're translating the plates of Nephi, the first Nephi through Omni. I mean, Jonathan in one of his earlier books speculated that it might have been when they were translating some of the Isaiah stuff, but that's
even beyond that's the second stage of the speculation, because nobody who was there recorded what Joseph was dictating on these occasions. Right. So we have no confidence really that what he was dictating during this demonstration is even in the Book of Mormon.
Right.
I mean, David didn't say, I was there when he dictated, Nephi saying whatever.
Alma chapter 2 or whatever.
Yeah, nobody
Right.
said any of that. And so when David Whitmer, if you read his address to believers in Christ, he says, this is the manner that the translation was done. But he doesn't say, I saw this happen. And so that's a tell for someone who's claiming knowledge about how something happened that they
It
didn't
sounds like
observe.
something a couple of lawyers would do.
Yeah, well, it is. To us, it's real obvious. I mean,
Right.
it drives us nuts that nobody cross-examined these people.
Right.
Because seriously, they're all witnesses do that all the time. They say, "Well, this and this happened." They say, "Well, how do you know?" And I say, "Well, someone told me," or
I heard.
everybody knows.
I heard.
Yeah, I heard.
someplace.
So when I read through, including with Emma's is similar, but when you read through what they actually said, they didn't really testify about what they actually observed. And Emma did in a way. We can address her in a minute.
I want to go to Emma because to me, she's
Okay.
real key to here.
Okay. Well, let me take
Finish
1
David.
minute to finish
Yeah.
David.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So David he's not a witness. He becomes a witness when he has his 3 witness vision experience, angelic
witness.
visit. But
Was he
before
one of the 3 or one of the
He's
8?
one of the
he's
three.
one of the
David
3,
was.
David Whitmer. But before then, he doesn't see the translation. He's not a scribe. He's not around for the large majority of the translation, which takes place in harmony. Even for the part that's going on in his house, he's like around working on the farm, but he's not upstairs with Oliver and Joseph. So, but he is, a dedicated early member of the church. He's one of the 3 witnesses. And so through the 1830s, he's a, dedicated member of the church. He goes to Missouri. He's made one of the leaders of the church in Missouri. And then in 1838, he leaves the church. And, that's a whole history in and of itself. But
That's part of the Missouri persecution.
Right,
stuff.
right. So he leaves the church and he never comes back. Oliver, the other 2 witnesses, Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris, they also leave the church, but they eventually come back. David Whitmer never comes back. So David Whitmer settles in Missouri. He stays in Missouri because he actually helped out the militia. So he's kind of, gets a pass on having been a Mormon. So he settles in Missouri, and you basically don't hear anything from David Whitmer for 30 years. 1850s, 1860s, even into the 1870s, you just hear nothing from David
Probably
Whitmer. He's
understandable given how he was treated in Missouri.
right. Well, I mean, nobody's blaming him, but just that's the facts that he just is. He's not involved in any of the groups that split off after the Joseph Smiths assassinated. He's not involved in trying to put together the reorganization with Joseph Smith III. He's got nothing to do with them. He's got nothing to do with the Strangites. He's just sitting in his livery business in Missouri, minding his own business and really not doing anything involved with the restoration for like 30 years. And then finally, in the 1870s, he starts to emerge, if you will. And part of it may be because William McClellan comes around and is trying to get things going. The reorganized church has gotten going by then. Of course, the LDS church is in Utah and making a lot of waves. So things are happening in the restoration, broadly spoken, by 1870s. And so David Whitmer starts to reemerge. Now, he reemerges partly because out of his own efforts, he kind of forms a little church of his own, which is basically the Whitmer family. And because he's in Missouri, is not that far from St. Louis, he's really accessible to the media. So in the 1870s, Mormons are starting to become big news, right? And so suddenly when newspaper reporters find out, hey, wait a minute, there's one of the original guys living right here down the railroad tracks in Missouri. We don't have to go trekking out to Utah to try to talk to Brigham Young. We can go and talk to this David Whitmer guy who's right here just outside St. Louis. It's just a whistle stop on the railroad. way. So he starts to get interviewed in newspapers and so forth because he's very accessible, and he is now starts to push his version of the gospel. Now, David Whitmer came from a background. He was like all the original Mormons. He was a very radical, strict Protestant, and so he believed in, like many other Protestants of his time, in scriptural inerrancy. In other words, the Bible is absolutely true, word for word, and so forth.
No mistakes.
No mistakes. And which is, a common belief of people of his background. And still is amongst many people. So he had kind of two things that he was pushing. One, he continued to believe in the Book of Mormon, but his view of the Book of Mormon was the same as his view of the Bible. It was inerrant. It was without fault, just like the Bible was. This was the perception that David Whitmer brought to the Book of Mormon. And the other thing was, of course, he had split with Joseph, and there was no reconciliation. This is not like with Martin or Oliver. He felt that Joseph, right after the Book of Mormon was done, had become a fallen prophet. And he felt that Joseph was absolutely a fallen prophet, and everything that happened after the Book of Mormon was falsehood. So he rejected the Doctrine and Covenants. He rejected the idea of priesthood restoration, even though he was involved in calling the First Quorum of the 12. He rejected the whole idea of priesthood offices. He rejected the idea of continuing revelation. He believed in the Book of Mormon, but
even with Hiram Page, I thought they were buddies.
Well, they were in-laws. But the thing is, Hiram Page, he moved to Missouri too. He was in David Whitmer's little church,
right?
But they didn't have any more revelations or seer stones or anything. Yeah. So that was David's, that was his thing. So so when in the by the 1880s. Everybody was coming to see him because he was now the last surviving witness, and he had the original printer's manuscript. So he suddenly, people from Utah came to see him. Joseph Smith III and other people from the organized church would come to see him. Everybody's trying to make nice with him, and so he finally decided, and he had his own little church. And so he decided, okay, it's time for me to give my story to the world. So in 1878, just a couple of years, 1 year before he dies, he's in his late 80s, I believe, he publishes this book called An Address to All Believers in Christ. And basically in it, he reiterates his testimony of the Book of Mormon, and, he reiterates his statement, his three witnesses statement, that testimony, he reiterates that. And then he basically goes on for the rest of the book saying Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet. And he denounces everything Joseph Smith did from the time, after the time of the Book of Mormon on. This is where he then starts to give the stone in the hat account. And the thing is that he, like Jonathan was saying, he says, this is the manner in which it was done, but he doesn't ever say, I saw Joseph Smith do it this way, or I looked at the Urim and Thummim and saw this, because he didn't. He wasn't a witness. He didn't actually see things. But this, stone in the hat account was now becoming widespread. William McClellan had gone around telling it to lots of people, and it jived with what David had witnessed when Joseph did this one-time demonstration. They were kind of okay with the idea of seer stones because his brother-in-law, Hiram Page, had kind of dabbled in it.
But it was also to refute the Spalding theory.
And it refuted the Spalding theory. So he was against the Spalding theory.
He started off talking about Spalding before he talked about the stone in the
hat.
Hat.
And the advantage of the stone in the hat is that the Spalding theory was that Joseph was behind a veil, hence the Mormonism Unveiled. And so he would, the idea was that what he was hiding behind the veil was this manuscript from Spalding that Sidney Rigdon had doctored up. And so he was like reading it off, and then he'd throw out, the pages.
I've done a presentation on
You did,
Spalding, but I haven't released it yet. You saw it because it was live, but I need
you
to
did it
release
at
that.
the Perspective Forum, right? So you know that
That was such a garbage theory.
but the point is that at this particular time, they still hadn't found the manuscript in Hawaii.
Right. Yeah, that was 1880s when they found it in Hawaii,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, but then to have it actually brought back and people actually read it, it was not available at the time David Whitmer wrote this book.
Right.
So he was
still the prevailing theory at the
Right.
time.
but it was the dominant
It's
theory.
the theory that will never die.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should.
Yeah. So, so David renounced that. The key thing being that he said, look, I was there at the beginning, and, Joseph Smith was there, and my brother was there, and Hiram was there, and Emma was there, and none of us ever saw or heard of Sidney Rigdon before he showed up as a convert.
Right. December 1830,
And so,
I think. Or
which is, okay, so that's a valid point. David Whitmer was around, and if he never saw Sidney Rigdon until he comes up after the Book of Mormon's published,
Right.
that's a pretty valid piece of testimony.
So he was refuting it that way, but also because he said there was no screen.
Right.
Oh, yeah. There was no
There's
cloth
no
between
veil
Joseph, yeah.
because he was looking in his hat,
Yeah.
which is something that he had seen once. And,
He had seen what once?
the stone in the hat, our little demonstration that we were talking about that we think Joseph did, just to resolve the awful curiosity of all the folks around the Whitmer home at the time. And also, William McClellan had been going around spreading this. And William McClellan didn't join the church until several years after the church was founded. So he had no firsthand knowledge whatsoever. But he picked up on this theory because he too was trying to kind of downgrade Joseph as a prophet, because he also was a fallen prophet advocate, which so he and David Whitmer were kind of the two guys really pushing Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet whole meme.
It's pretty amazing that he fell in 1830. I mean, I can understand how people say Joseph was fallen when he brought in polygamy, but 1830, that's pretty early.
Oh yeah, no. This was David Whitmer was one of the people who said, I don't know about this priesthood restoration stuff.
Right.
I don't know what I don't know what I never heard about that stuff until years later and so forth. So just to conclude our story with David Whitmer. So David Whitmer, there's a huge record though. He was accessible. So there's tons of newspaper interviews because he was accessible to everybody. And he wrote this book at the end of his life, An Address to All Believers in Christ, where he really laid it out all in writing. And this is firsthand. So he's a readily accessible source. There's lots of David Whitmer's, material to go by, but the fact is that he was never a witness to anything that he was asserting in these books. So Richard Lloyd Anderson, who was the leading scholar on the three witnesses and the eight witnesses, formerly, was a professor at BYU, now passed away. He wrote the books. He wrote the book on the three witnesses, and he spent his whole life studying the witnesses. So sort of toward the end of his life, so I researched Richard Lloyd Anderson, what he had to say, and Richard Lloyd Anderson didn't think that David Whitmer was a credible witness. And the conclusion that Richard Lloyd Anderson came to was that having left the church, David Whitmer then redid the translation story in a way that was consistent with his decision that Joseph was a fallen prophet. And that, basically, since he wasn't, so David Whitmer was not a liar. When he saw something,
he was fallen because he used a seer stone, though, is it?
No, he felt he was a fallen prophet just because he started to get away from strict biblical primitivism.
Okay.
So that was what attracted the David Whitmer, was that he was a super radical, conservative Protestant. He believed, in the Bible was inerrant, and he believed in the primitive church as in the Bible. So when the church was established and said, we're going to have the church like in the Bible, that was very appealing to people with David Whitmer's background. But when Joseph started to elaborate and have priesthood law offices and so forth, that's when David Whitmer started to get disenchanted, because that was no longer strictly what was in the Bible, at least as David Whitmer saw.
The main thing that converted David Whitmer was his experience as one of the three witnesses.
Okay.
That was
Right.
his rock that he always held on to.
Right.
So,
But, after Joseph started to, elaborate beyond the Book of Mormon. And the other thing, of course, that upset David Whitmer was that Joseph made revisions to the Book of Mormon.
and to the Doctrine and Covenants.
And to
You
the
talked
Doctrine and
about that,
Covenants,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So David's, again, had this, and this is Richard
He's
Lloyd
more
Anderson.
of a Book of Commandments guy, if anything.
Right. So, so this is what Richard Lloyd Anderson points out. He said David Whitmer had this, scriptural inerrancy view that the word of the Bible is absolutely true, word for word. So he carried that over to the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is absolutely true, word for word.
The original.
The original. And so when Joseph started to make corrections and revisions,
Messed it up.
that really upset David Whitmer. So because that was now longer
So do you
his thing.
think that the church quotes Whitmer too much, David Whitmer too much, in the Gospel Topics essay and in Saints? Is that what you're driving at?
Yes, he's not a reliable. He's a source. He's there.
I would frame it this way: not that they quote him too much, but that they quote Joseph and Oliver not at all. And so people who read those materials don't understand the whole context. And I think it's valuable to see what David Whitmer had to say, because he was one of the three witnesses. But I would not put him as more credible or reliable than Joseph and Oliver.
Okay.
But the essay does.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Jim Lucas and Jonathan Neville. Jim and Jonathan, thank you so much for letting me give you a hard time. And sorry I accidentally cut this out. I didn't mean to, but we'll have that transcript out shortly. So thanks again. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have Cheryl Bruno back on the show. And this time we're going to talk about Emma's denials of polygamy and her book called Secret Covenants. Thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.